The rain in Oakhaven didn't wash away the grime. It only turned the soot into a black, oily sludge that clung to the cobblestones. Silas stood in the shadow of a gargoyle, his silhouette jagged and wrong. The gear in his cheek had stopped pushing through. It had settled, a cold brass blossom rooted in his jaw. He no longer felt the chill of the night. Instead, he felt the friction of his own heart, a heavy iron flywheel that spun with a terrifying, magnetic hum. He was no longer a detective. He was the ticking ghost of a city. Detective Elara hadn't slept in 3 weeks. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the rhythmic click-clack of Silas's final footsteps. She stood in the city's industrial slaughterhouse, the air thick with the smell of iron and ozone. Beside her, Eris, the new forensic specialist, knelt over a heap of discarded metal and meat. "It's a new design," Aris whispered, his voice trembling, as he pointed a flashlight at the remains. "The previous killers used clockwork to replace limbs. This one is using the body as a furnace." The victim was Cassian, a local watchmaker. He wasn't just dead, he had been converted. His ribcage had been pried open and reinforced with steel struts to act as a bellows. Every few seconds, despite his lack of a head, the lungs would hiss, puffing out a cloud of scalding, meaty steam. Elara reached out to touch a serial number etched into the brass piston, driven through Cassian's sternum. It wasn't a number, it was a countdown, and the digits were moving. "You're looking for the wrong architect, Detective," a voice boomed from the rafters. A figure descended on a rusted chain, his movements accompanied by the scream of metal on metal. This was Mordecai, the Foundryman. His lower jaw had been replaced by a heavy iron grate that spilled glowing embers with every word. He landed heavily, his boots cracking the concrete. Silas was a failure, a half-finished thought. "I am the industrial revolution of the soul." Before Mordecai could strike, a heavy, metallic thud echoed from the entrance. Silas stepped into the light of the furnace, his coat billowing like smoke. He looked less like a man and more like a collection of sharpened angles and oily leather. He didn't look at Elara. His glowing amber eye was fixed solely on Mordecai. "The gears don't belong to you," Silas said, his voice a distorted rasp of grinding stones. He raised his arm, and the sleeve tore open as a set of serrated harvester blades unfolded from his forearm. The two mechanical nightmares collided in a spray of sparks and black bile. Silas moved with a frantic, twitching speed, his blades shrieking against Mordecai's iron hide. Mordecai swung a massive, coal-heated hammer that shattered the brickwork wherever it landed. Silas took a blow to the shoulder, the sound of snapping bone drowned out by the groan of a bending support strut. He didn't flinch. He simply recalculated, his internal gears screaming as they shifted into a higher, more violent ratio. Mordecai grabbed Silas by the throat, the heat from his iron hands charring Silas's collar. "I will melt you down and cast you into 1,000 needles," Mordecai roared. He shoved Silas toward the massive smelting vat at the center of the room. Silas's boots skidded on the floor, leaving deep gouges in the stone. He reached out, his fingers now tipped with hardened steel claws, digging into Mordecai's iron jaw grate, pulling with a strength that defied the laws of biology. With a sickening metallic snap, Silas ripped the iron grate from Mordecai's face. A torrent of white-hot coals tumbled onto the floor, setting the spilled oil ablaze. Mordecai stumbled back, his headless, hollow neck stump spraying a mixture of steam and dark, viscous grease. Silas didn't stop. He lunged forward, driving his arm blades deep into Mordecai's chest, piercing the boiler that served as the villain's heart. The explosion was silent at first, just a blinding flash of blue pressure. The factory began to collapse as the pressure valves failed. Silas turned to Elara, who was pinned under a fallen beam. He didn't use his hands to lift it. He jammed his mechanical shoulder under the iron and heaved, the sound of his internal mainsprings snapping one by one. As the beam lifted, he looked at her with his one remaining human eye. It was filled with a profound, agonizing lucidity. "Run, Elara," he croaked. "The clock is ticking for us all." Elara stood on the street outside as the slaughterhouse vanished into a plume of fire and twisted metal. There were no sirens, only the heavy rhythmic tolling of the city's central clock tower. She looked down at her hand. Silas had pressed a small, blood-stained brass gear into her palm before the end. As she watched, the gear began to twitch, turning slowly against her skin. The mercy wasn't a gift, it was a contagion. And in the silence of the night, Elara felt her own pulse begin to tick.